this video, I'm going to build an awesome white-themed 1440p gaming PC build with 0 visible cables, or at least that's the plan. I've got my hands on a really interesting case I've never built in before, a stunning all-white GPU, and some parts that should look absolutely amazing. I'll be taking you guys along for the ride, talking through all of my component selections, building this system as we go, and seeing what goes right and what maybe goes a little bit wrong. Let's do this. The Corsair K65 Plus Wireless is a 75% mechanical gaming keyboard with hot swappable pre-lubed Corsair MLX red switches. You get 2 wireless connection modes with both Bluetooth and 2.4 GHz and up to 266 hours of battery life for non-stop gaming. Customizable RGB lighting, Corsair IQ support and a programmable rotary dial make this a compact keyboard that has it all. Perky RGB lighting, a sleek grey and silver design, 2 layers of sound dampening and screw-in stabilizers round off a keyboard with plenty of features. Now, these 0 cable builds seem to be all the rage at the moment, and I can see why. They create a sleeker aesthetic, are arguably easier to wire up, especially for first-time or novice PC builders, and allow you to assemble some really good-looking builds. The problem, though, with a lot of these 0 cables designs, especially those from GeekaWhat and MSI, is that you still have a GPU cable to contend with, something I feel which kind of defeats the point. Now, ASUS, on the other hand, are the only brand who seem to have got this right so far, though I'm sure others will eventually follow. Now, the 4070 Ti Super in this build actually has an extra connector on which deals with the power, removing the need for a dedicated GPU power cable. That is hopefully going to make this build look really sleek. Other than being practically useful as far as power goes, I also love the 4070 Ti, and I think as far as the centerpiece for this build goes, it's a great choice. Now, in the current AMD versus NVIDIA GPU battle, there are good cards to buy, bad cards to buy, and those that sit in the middle. For me, the 4070 Ti Super is one of NVIDIA's best GPUs right now. It fixes a lot of the problems that the original 70 Ti design had, namely by adding 4 gigs more VRAM, which is great especially for 1440p and a bit of 4K gaming, and it is fairly price competitive when compared to its AMD rivals. AMD still tends to be a little cheaper when you factor in straight rasterization performance per dollar, but take into account useful features like DLSS and ray tracing, which on a high-end build are useful to have, and this card starts to win itself a few more plaudits. I must admit, I'm not always a fan of midlife refreshes like NVIDIA did with Super, and you can see that right now with Intel 14th gen, which is, on the high end of the market, having some problems. For NVIDIA 40 series, on the other hand, though, it seems to have worked quite well, and the power-efficient nature of Ada Lovelace means chucking a bit more wattage through each of the designs has actually turned out to be quite a good thing. Stunning TUF card in this white. I never thought the TUF design would look good in white. I was wrong. Really nice subtle design, silver accents. I love what ASUS have done, and while it's light on things like RGB lighting, and this heatsink could definitely be a white powder coat finish, I actually have to say I love the GPU in basically every other way. Really, really clean design. Now, it pairs up pretty perfectly with the ASUS TUF Gaming Z790 BTF Wi-Fi. Now, of course, going for a BTF case, you need a BTF compatible motherboard, and this is one of the best looking designs on the market right now. Whether it's attention to detail touches like this white included Wi-Fi antenna, or the really nice white plastic shrouding, it's a good looking board. My only criticism would be when you compare this to Gigabyte's Ice range, which has a white PCB and even white clips on the memory slots and GPU, there is still a little too much black in this motherboard for my liking, especially for a white themed gaming PC build. Now, you might notice this is Intel, and Intel right now are, well, how does one put this? Not at the top of everybody's product wish list. Now, they have had extensive problems when it comes to especially the high-end CPUs, the i9s in particular. They run so hot, so do the i7s to be fair, and the platform is undoubtedly on its way out. Now, that's not to say that an Intel CPU is a terrible choice for the build, and that's why I've gone for Intel's Core i5-14600K in this system. Compared to AMD's Ryzen 5 CPUs, and even the lower-end Ryzen 7s, you get a lot more cores on this thing than what you'll find on the AMD counterpart. The i5 is one of the only really decent CPUs in the 14th gen range, and of course, if you wanted to swap it out, you could go for something like a 7700X in this build instead. The 7800X 3D is also a great shout, though that's a little bit pricey at the moment, but does offer great performance. I'll be installing this in just a moment. First though, good to cover off the memory, I've gone for something a little bit different today. This Lexar Ares 32GB kit. This is actually 6400 MHz, has all the XMP and Expo profiles, and looks really quite nice. Love the white heat spreader and the RGB up top, which you can of course customize in software. All the RGB today is going to go through the motherboard, which should make it nice and easy to control a little bit later. Storage-wise, one of my favorite drives at the moment, Samsung's SSD 990 Pro. This is one of those drives you really can set and forget. High speeds, about 7 GB on the read and the write, getting towards that 8 GB mark. And while it is pricey for a build like this, where we're already spending a decent chunk of change, I don't think it's going to be out the budget for most people in a system like this. The first thing to install is the processor. This is nice and easy. Just push down the arm on the socket, lift the socket cover up, and then drop the CPU into place. Line up the triangle on the processor with the triangle on the motherboard and socket cover. Add the arm back down once, of course, the socket cover has been seated, and you are good to go. As far as memory installation goes, of course, using the grey slots today, that's going to give me the dual channel performance that we need in this build. Weirdly, the actual barcode label is on, not the wrong side, but on the visible side. So Lexar, in future, could we swap that please? Just makes it a bit less visible when you're looking into the case if it's facing the CPU. SSD is next. That's going to go into the top M.2 slot just here. As much as this motherboard is a fancy BTF design, it doesn't have cool quality of life features like toolless NVMe installation. And again, I find that perhaps a little bit disappointing to see. For a board at this price, I think ASUS maybe could have done just a little bit more to make it easier to use and a bit more user-friendly. Drive goes in though. That is actually toolless as far as its retention goes. It's just when you pop the heat spreader back on that you have to use a screwdriver. I'm also at this stage going to do some prep for the CPU cooler. I've gone ahead and checked out the manual and picked up some mounting hardware. More specifically, this Intel backplate and these Intel standoffs. Backplate goes through the rear of the motherboard, while the standoffs are going to screw into each of the threads, now poking through around the CPU. Nice and easy. With all this nicely sorted out, I can then go ahead and move the motherboard into the case. You might be wondering as well, seeing the power supply on the table, why it's black in a white build. Well, again, the advantage of BTF is none of the cables are visible, so it doesn't actually matter. As far as motherboard installation goes though, always want to start by stripping the case down of as many side panels as possible. Nice big glass panel, not too tinted, which I like, especially on white PC cases. While the rear panel also feels like fairly good quality, really substantial, very little flex. And the top panel too, with this cube design and integrated removable mesh dust filter, is really good. I have to say, with this GT302 case from ASUS, they seem to have really stepped things up. And my plaudits for this case don't stop there either. You'll see at the front of the chassis, you've got 3 included 140mm ARGB fans, with a further 140mm ARGB unit at the rear. Everything is fully powder coated in white. The shade of white looks nice. Even the screws that hold the fans in and the pop rivets in the case are all silver. So again, they've really done a good job keeping to the theme. And one massive mistake other brands make is with the cables. These two are perfectly on brand and fit exactly with the color scheme of the chassis. You know what, ASUS? Fair play. Again, one more thing. Look at this for attention to detail. The inside plastic accents of all the USB ports are white as well. That is frankly incredible. All the standoffs are going to be in the right place. ATX board, ATX case, match made in heaven. However, one thing to be aware of is that all the connectors on the back are quite delicate. And while there are cutouts, you don't want to get this too misaligned, as you may bend some pins. As much as BTF is intended to be more user-friendly, ironically it can actually be a bit more dangerous during this stage. So try and line the I/O up as best you can, and from the I/O the rest should all follow. There we go, not too bad. Hopefully the center standoff is raised. It is. That's going to hold the board in. Good stuff again, ASUS. I like to see that. I'm just going to push it down on the standoffs a little bit to buy us some time, and during that I can actually go ahead and screw the motherboard in. 3 screws at the top, 3 along the middle, and 3 down the bottom. The screws for this, by the way, go included at the back of the case. Once that's in, I'm going to finish the cooler off. Now this is the ASUS ROG Strix LC3 360. I actually, again, I'm full of praise for ASUS today. I think this cooler is fantastic. The way it's packaged is really nice. The only criticism I'd have is that ASUS haven't actually pre-installed the fans. That is a bit of a shame, because I think that is something we're seeing a lot more on coolers nowadays. One thing I do like though is that the water block, the top piece is actually detachable, making it easier to install in the first instance. Again, all powder coated in white, really like it. And in our performance testing, where we've looked at a huge range of the latest and most popular coolers, it holds up really well. The fans, I think, are not quite an exact match. These are TUF fans, these are ROG fans, but it's close enough. The shade of white should hopefully be the same. And it's little things like the actual radiator screws having built-in washers that I really like. I'm going to pop all the fans onto the radiator first of all. The cables are going to be coming towards me so that once this is installed into the case, they run out the back nice and easy. And sticking with the zero cables theme, hopefully as few of them as possible will be visible. The only thing ASUS could improve upon, like they have with the case, is they could have given silver screws rather than these ones, which don't match. But it's a very very small, nitpicky complaints, and I think for the overall build aesthetic, it's not going to cause too many issues. So 4 screws on each fan, all 12, get those nice and secure, then a simple case of screwing the radiator into the top, again using the included screws. This will be in exhaust, pulling air through the rad and out of the case. Installing the water block is next up. A little bit of thermal paste. I think this cooler does come with it pre-applied if you've never used it before. Huh? I think this cooler does come with it pre-applied. What? What the f? But because we've had this on our test rig and stuff, the thermal paste is obviously going to need reapplying. Then a simple case of just getting the tubes out of the way and dropping the cooler onto the standoffs. 4 thumb screws come included, and they do have screwdriver threads on. Again, good work from ASUS. I like the case, I like the cooler, I like the whole build. It's looking good. Get these hand tightened first of all, and then just torque them off with the screwdriver at the end to make sure the contact between the CPU and of course the water block is nice and firm. You can't quite get these tight enough by hand in my experience. The final thing with the cooler is to add on this little ASUS ROG logo that sits on the top. This uses looks like a USB header. So I'm gonna chuck that again through the rear of the case and then fasten the cooler on. I guess we want to rotate this so the orientation's correct. Aha, there we go. Is that right? Yeah, that's good. Now the black cable ironically does blend in with the motherboard, so that's not too bad. In an ideal world, the cable would actually just go through the tubes and up to the back of the radiator where it could be hidden away. That's what you see on high-end coolers, but this ASUS unit is admittedly not all that expensive. Now moving through to the graphics card, this is the bit I am very excited about. And you can see if I hover it in, what this whole build is gonna look like. Look at that! It looks so good. Now in terms of PCI slots, it looks like, yes, second and third as normal. You'll see 2 screws, one here and one here. Remove both of those, keep the screws as they'll be fastening the card in just a second. Slide the GPU in. This shouldn't be too difficult. Push this retention clip up. There we go. Bit of pressure. Look at that. Those same screws I literally just mentioned are going to go back in as well at this stage. I guess the only disadvantage of this card is that it probably wouldn't work on a PCI riser. I don't know if you can get riser cables for vertical installations with the ASUS little nubbin on. I'd be interested to find out actually what the options are if that was something you wanted to do. I can also pop the top panel back on. This is just going to click on without too many dramas. Lovely stuff. And then all that remains is the power supply. I'm going to install this ASUS TUF Gaming 750 watt, fine for the 4070 Ti, perhaps a little lightweight for anything higher end, and all the cables will install at the back without too many problems. I'm going to start by plugging all the cables into the rear of the power supply, followed by installing this into the bottom area of the case. I'm then going to plug in the motherboard cable, which is the largest, followed by the 2 8-pin CPU power connectors, GPU power, which comes in the form of this Gen 5 cable to the rear of the motherboard. Then it's time for the front panel cables. Standard USB 3, which is larger, goes first, while USB-C, which is smaller, goes directly above, and I'll be plugging in second. USB 2, which goes down to the bottom for, of course, the CPU cooler. JFP1, which is all the front panel cables, that goes to the bottom left-hand side as you're looking at the case from the rear. HD audio to the bottom right-hand side, and then finally, multiple 3-pin ARGB headers straight to the motherboard for easy control, and then multiple fan headers too. Some of these are going down the bottom, and some are going at the top of the case. And with all of those ready to go, it's finally time to see how good this PC looks and how it performs. Through into performance then, and it's time to see whether this 4070 Ti Super system really stacks up. And spoiler alert, it does really well actually. Call of Duty's Warzone is the first great example of this. 4K high, DLSS on quality, and the build achieved over 100 FPS with 120 frames to be precise. Really pleased with this. Modern Warfare 3 was a similar story. 4K high, DLSS again enabled and set to quality, and the build achieved 124, so a few more frames than last time around. Starfield at 4K high settings in this build, again also did pretty well. Starfield, very hard game to run, seen very mixed results across a range of different systems, and the 4070 Ti Super achieved just shy of 70 FPS. This is impressive when you consider in a recent 7900 XTX build, we only achieved 75, so to lose just 8 frames for what is a fairly significant cost saving is quite impressive. Move through into Hogwarts Legacy at 4K high next up, and the build did well again, 76 FPS on average, really really pleased with that, while Fortnite, to tune things down to 1080p, gives us a good example of the frame rates that are achievable if you're willing to sacrifice on the resolution front. The build achieved 283 FPS. That's more than enough frame rate for, well, just about anybody. Apex Legends at 1440p high, notching that resolution up a mark, and the build again did well, 282 FPS, more than enough for this competitive Battle Royale title, while RPG games like Cyberpunk 2077 again do well on this build, 4K high, and the system achieved 61 FPS on average. If you'd like to learn more about any of the parts mentioned today, they will be linked in the description below, and equally, if you'd like to see more from me, make sure to get subscribed. Thanks for watching, and as always, we'll see you in the next one.